Right, I think that's working. So thank you so much for dedicating your lunch break to listen to me talk a bit about developing collaborative relationships with student partners. So just to say, I welcome any and all contact. I've got my social media connections there and my email, but I'll also be flagging at the end of today's presentation should anyone want to follow up on anything or just follow me online. So, um, just a kind of overview of what I'm going to be covering today. I thought it'd be polite to tell you who I am and kind of why I'm talking to you today. So I'll just give you a little introductory section. And then I'm going to just talk a little bit about management theory and some things that I've picked up just to sort of reflect on some of the challenges and benefits on working with student collaborators. And then I'm going to walk you through four quite different projects, all that I've learned different things from that I feel that I would like to share. I think will be useful for other people to share. And we could maybe file a lot of what I talk about under things I wish I knew before I started a project. I think that's often the way when we reflect on a lot of our work. But I'm quite keen to help other people work with students. This is definitely an ethos that I very much endorse, and I hope that comes through from today's presentation. And what I'm going to do at the end is just reflect back on this management framework that I'll be talking about and just plug in some of the advice that I've been talking about just to kind of bookend this presentation. So who am I? I'm Alex Reid from the Department of Psychology at the University of York. I've just started, well, this is my 10th year of working in this particular department. Just to give you a bit about my background, I have a PhD in sleep and memory research, and I did a postdoctoral position in Swansea in the same area, and then pivoted into a teaching and scholarship track. And I'm very proud of this discipline, and I really enjoy it. And I hope that's also something that comes through in today's presentation. So I do have lots of roles in our department as part of this teaching scholarship contract, but probably the most relevant one to this particular presentation is that I'm the staff student liaison officer, and this is a position that we basically created in response to NSS feedback on National Student Survey feedback, which indicated we could be doing a better job with our feedback processes and promoting student voice. And based on some of the work that I'm going to be talking about today and some of the work that I've done whilst in this position, basically this is why I was allocated this particular role. I also just want to say, just for transparency, I'm part of the T-Fund committee who are hosting this presentation. A fantastic bunch of individuals. I've learned a lot by being part of this committee already, and I do encourage anyone listening to continue watching, continue enjoying our content, and also maybe becoming part of the committee moving forward. And I just wanted to say as well, my rationale for this presentation is kind of twofold. It's one, just to help other people, particularly maybe more junior members of staff who are just starting out working with students, just to give them a steer on some of the things I've learned, and also just to really promote this kind of ethos, working with students, because I think it's a highly valuable thing to do. And there are lots of reasons for this. So I've got some guidance here adapted from the Advanced Higher Education Academy. So we've got Professor O'Hara, and he talks about these points regarding the benefits of working with students. I've added some of my own into the mix as well. So first up, we just have productivity. So I think students are actually an amazing resource, and they can really be a force multiplier on any project you're working from. So from that perspective alone, I think it's really good harnessing sort of motivated individuals to be part of your work. I'd also say it's part of what I'd call enriched education. So I think students really do appreciate having meaningful input and ownership of projects as part of their university experience. I think it really adds something for the students. It gives value added to their experience in higher education. And we also have employability considerations. There are many transferable skills, many soft skills, and these all contribute to CV building in our students, which puts them in a better place upon leaving our institutions. We also have student-led insights, and this is particularly important if you're working on a project that's ultimately going to be student-facing. We can only bring so much to the table as educators, and really students can help fill in gaps or give insights into things that maybe we're missing or ways of working that they prefer. We also have a professional development, and this counts for both staff and students involved in the project. The idea of managing a project and working with students can really help develop your own skill set, but also in terms of training, you might be training students on how to operate certain software or work in certain ways, which I think is very valuable for them. But also, I would encourage anyone listening really to engage in any professional development opportunities at your own institution. I've just started a management course off the back of a lot of my work with students. I realized it's something I needed to do. And I found that incredibly valuable. We're halfway through the program now, and it's been a really good use of my time. So I'd encourage anyone else to do that as well. And lastly, inclusivity and community building. I really think just working with students fosters a sort of sense of belonging and a long-lasting, meaningful relationships within your cohorts. And I'm not the only one who does this kind of work in our institution. And we have many groups working with students now in our department, and these move on year to year across cohorts. So I think that kind of level of engagement and a sense of belonging in your cohorts is something we want to promote. So what are the challenges of co-creation with students? And I'm leaning a little bit here on a framework by John Adair, which is an action-centered leadership model, where he talks about three kind of interlocking components of good line management or management in general. And that's the team, the task, and the individual. And I think it's important to consider a sort of management ethos. I think there's a tendency in higher education that many people join sort of a university or institution with a love of something specific. It might be teaching, it might be research. But then all of a sudden, as you progress through your career, one day you might be finding that you're taking on lots of responsibilities that you're not necessarily trained on. And management is one of these. I do think this is why it's important to embrace this professional development. And this is something I've just picked up off the course, and it's something I found useful to sort of conceptualize some of the things I'll be talking about. But really, this focuses on these elements, the team. So, as a manager, you want to be facilitating shared goals, a collaborative atmosphere. And I think in higher education, navigating power dynamics, if you're a student lecturer or you're a professor or something at your institution, they might be a bit more reticent to contribute or provide insight if they're feeding a little bit this power dynamic. So, navigating that, I think, is quite important. We've also got the task. So I think it's important for a manager to define very clear goals and what the ultimate deliverables are, and if there are sub goals that need to be achieved, and monitoring progress as you go through the project. And then we have the individual, so consulting with individuals on their way of working, recognize them as collaborators, making sure their inputs are recognized, and getting to know your team basically. So these are three elements that this is not exhaustive. These are not all the components within the team, the task, the individual, but there are some of the ones that I think are particularly important for working with students. We also have communication in the working environment. So how do you accommodate students? They probably need flexible working. They've got obligations on their course. Many will be pinning down external jobs. Many might have accessibility related issues. So these all need to be adjusted and accommodated, particularly in the way that you communicate with students. There's also logistics and resources. So there might be pressures on funding. Currently in higher education, there's a lot of pressure to do more with less at the moment. And there might be an investment on your part as a manager to provide the requisite training. There's also, I think, the balance between, I think, independent working and oversight in students. So there might be opportunities for students to have a free range on something, but there's a tension as a manager to make sure the project doesn't go off the rails, that tasks are met. And this balance might be differ from student to student or team to team, depending on their expertise or accessibility needs. So these are all things that I'll be building on as I go through sort of today's presentation. So the first of four initiatives that I just wanted to talk about is PsychOut, which is a student magazine, student-run magazine in our department. And this is what I call a rolling initiative. So any student from any cohort can contribute to this and they can write articles. And the idea here is that they're aimed at a lay audience. So this is a publicly available magazine. You could access it now, and I've got a QR code on a subsequent slide if you want to look at some of our back issues. But this particular initiative has almost entirely given over to student oversight with staff guidance, and that would be me primarily, just making sure that this thing ticks over and keeps running. And this has been running for quite a few years now, so around about 10 years. We've got quite a few issues out now. We're on issue 21, which you can see on the right there, and this particular issue is on the theme of clinical psychology and mental health. So what do students do as part of this exercise? Well, they recruit and organize an editorial team. They will select a theme that is of interest to them, either collectively as a group, or the editor might make a decision on that. And then they will roll with this theme and get articles submitted around this theme. They'll do everything. They'll even design the graphics. So this logo at the top is designed by a student, and it's a good example of just how useful it is leveraging student skills. They might have the abilities and skills and knowledge that you don't even know about that can really contribute to the outcomes of a project. So this is why consultation with individuals on your team is important. They obviously write and edit articles for this. They also generate accessible versions that can be read by a screen reader. So all the information will be put into a Google Doc that can be read by anyone using certain assistive technologies. And they also engage with what I call intergenerational training. So this is particularly important for the editors. They will pass on knowledge to the next group of individuals who are taking over that role on a rolling basis. So this is just to give you a kind of flavor of some of our these are the previous 5 issues. And we've got different themes here. We've got one on artificial intelligence, nature versus nurture, relationships, power, forensic psychology. So these themes are vague enough that students can plug in articles of interest of their own. And I should also add, they don't always have to be part of the main theme. It's just the theme's the running thing of that particular issue. Just to give you some examples of content, we have themed articles. So this particular article I've got on the left of the screen here, this is what can we learn from an octopus? And this was based on a theme of animal cognition. So this is something that the student found particularly interested in. They wanted to talk about more, and they were given the opportunity to do so in this particular magazine. And I think this is a really useful point to make about this magazine and what I talked about earlier in sort of maybe plugging in gaps of the curriculum. If there's something that maybe wasn't covered in enough detail for that particular student, they're now given an opportunity to talk about it. Also, and this is again completely off the student's back, they developed a subsection, a rolling subsection called Psychology in Action, where students talk about their work experiences through volunteering or job placements. And I think this is really useful from an employability perspective for students to see the options available to them. And we also have interviews, and these are typically done with members of staff within our department, but sometimes experts outside our department as well. So, for example, this is with Professor Katie Slocum. This was part of our animal cognition issue, and she talks about her work with chimps in Uganda. And I think this is really good for humanizing staff and maybe also making students aware of the community they're working with. So this also links to the sense of community I was talking about. So what are the benefits of this kind of initiative? I think there are some pretty numerous ones. I think it really supplements the curriculum, as I've said. And I think the skills required to write for a lay audience are undervalued and really important. So actually communicating complex information in a straightforward way, talking about sensitive topics in a mature and articulate way are really valuable skills that I would like to see my students have upon leaving our institution. I think also the responsibility the students have for undertaking this exercise, they really relish as being part of a larger project. And this also has official backing from the department. I think they appreciate the weight of the department being behind it as well. It's very useful for CV building. They get publications out of it. They get these transferable skills that they can talk about. And this links directly to employability. So not only the insights from the articles themselves, but also part of their working portfolio. So we've had at least one student go on to write for The Psychologist, which is the BPS magazine. And lastly, this community element that I keep talking about. So this is a unified team, but the roster keeps changing. Then there is a pressure on us to change and adapt as well. So for example, this used to be in print. There used to be print versions, but due to sort of budgetary restrictions, we moved it onto an online format. And this is just one way that the group or the team has had to adapt in the sort of ongoing changes. So this is part of a community, and this is part of our portfolio of things that we can offer students to the department when they join us. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention inclusivity. So this sort of became apparent to me as I was preparing to this presentation, but it does give a platform for students from maybe underrepresented or marginalized groups to have a voice that maybe they wouldn't normally have. So here's an older issue that we had themed on diversity, and also students that may be neurodivergent that wish to talk about their perspectives that also have the opportunity to write articles. So this is again really useful for building community. What are the sort of pressures on us to make sure this sort of continues and continues to work? Well, one's the fizzle out effect. This is basically any kind of initiative you've got with students. They're eventually going to graduate. So you need to be keeping an eye on this. Otherwise, the magazine will essentially cease to exist. So at key points, I will remind the editors to recruit a new editor, make sure that editor's trained and basically have a handover. And I will also keep promoting the magazine through the channels available to me. Quite importantly, you might want to consider a code of conduct. So there are certain ramifications to letting students talk about the things that they want to talk about. You maybe want to consider guidelines, a sort of style guide, which is something that we collaboratively wrote with students upon setting up the magazine. You may want to consider content warnings. So, for example, on the bottom right there, we've got one from our most recent issue, which was talking about quite sensitive things. You may want to also include a disclaimer on social media accounts and within the magazine itself, just to protect the institution that these are the opinions of students, not necessarily the department. So although it's endorsed by the department, students might have opinions and attitudes that are not necessarily reflective of what would be considered the mainstream sort of department outlook on something. So those are kind of guidelines there I think are quite important. And also, you will have involvement in proofreading. So our editors do a great job of doing passes on the content in the magazine, but also I think staff involvement is quite needed at the proofreading stage. There is a tendency for typos and things of that nature to slip in, but also just some oversight maybe regarding the content. So students, by taking or addressing issues that they find particularly interesting, there may be topics that are quite controversial or sensitive. So even if we just go back one slide, there's one article there called "Are Our Brains Racist?" So I would say I've never pulled an article for being controversial. I've never done heavy editing, but there have been some articles where I thought, oh, this could be potentially dangerous water to get into. But actually, I would say that by and large, our students done an excellent job in dealing with some of these sensitive topics. So I would also never underestimate students in terms of their capabilities of talking about these things. On the right here, we've got an example of an issue called "The Fish in the Scanner." They were talking about unusual experiments in psychology, and we caught in the sort of proofreading stage that the fish these students originally put on was a bass, and actually the original experiment involved an Atlantic salmon. It's a very small mistake, but it's just one of these things that you can pick up on. You want to make a polished sort of product. If it represents your department and the students' work, you want to do that justice. I think as well, you need clear boundaries on student time, particularly for editors, which it can take a little bit of work to get this the ball moving, and they obviously have other obligations, outside commitments. We make it very clear that basically the magazine is published when it's ready. So it used to be biannually, now it's typically annually. This publication it's just when there's enough impetus to publish. So I think that needs to be made very clear that the student's time and welfare comes first. And I would say it's also not paid work. By and large, I do encourage any kind of student involvement to be paid. This type of initiative is perhaps a little different. It takes a sort of year to publish, so I do think students do generally are able to find the time to contribute to these things. But I think it's important to bear in mind because students who are well resourced might have more bandwidth to contribute to extracurricular initiatives. And really, a lot of students might be disadvantaged if they're paying their way through university or they have caregiving responsibilities. So I do think payment is quite integral to a functioning initiative. And the larger scale initiatives that I talk about today, all the work is paid. Just some closing tips on this. I would say that this is a relatively low cost initiative to get up and running. It costs us £99 for a Canva license each year, and that's for 5 people. So it's actually used for other things. So um, it's not just used for this particular initiative, it's used for other things our teaching and scholarship staff are working on. So we get good value out of money for that. And I do think it needs to be developed so students have an ownership on this. So you don't want to be, as a staff, constantly monitoring this. It needs to be student driven. And this kind of input is heaviest at the initial setup and also just before publication when you're helping proofread. I think also you need to consider how you're going to support dissemination. Is there a spot on your website? Can you help the students set up an official social media account? For example, theirs is on the right on Blue Sky. They moved on to this. They had a big following on Twitter, but students decided to move away from Twitter for ethical reasons. So feel free to join us on Blue Sky should you want to see our publications coming out. And I think just pushing circulation through official channels, I will email everyone in the department when the magazine is available and give full credit to all the students and the authors in doing so. So those are things I learned from that particular initiative. And we also have the Graduate Voices Initiative. So this is the second project I wanted to talk about. And this is a very different type of initiative. In a nutshell, we got students from predominantly widening participation backgrounds. So For those of you not familiar, widening participation is typically an umbrella term for underrepresented demographics at university. It could be based on gender, it could be based on sexuality, disability, socioeconomic background, and so on. We got students who are predominantly from widening participation backgrounds to interview alumni from our institution in order to create videos with advice for students. So helping facilitate this intergenerational dynamic to produce coherent advice that students might want to hear from people who've come before them. So this was a large project. It involved 10 undergraduate and postgraduate students who were from different faculties, different departments, so not just psychology students, and 11 staff from various departments who contributed in different ways. It could be to training or it could be to line management. Here, student interns, they devised semi-structured interview questions. They ran 31 interviews in person online with alumni, which is quite a significant amount. They sat down together and identified emergent themes and then ultimately created and edited 9 3 to 5 minute videos around these themes. And these themes related from broad topics such as regrets our alumni had at university down to specific topics such as preparing for an interview. Just to give you a quick background, because I do think it's relevant to working with students as to the rationale of this particular project, it has been noticed in the wider literature that students, particularly from widening participation backgrounds, generally feel underprepared for the job market, and they maybe feel that they have less opportunity to network. And in general, there's lower levels of confidence and motivation in seeking out employability opportunities, particularly when they come to the end of their educational journey. And this corroborates, we basically recruited the Bridge Group, who's a social equality charity that does work with institutions to make sure or identify equality related issues. And they interviewed our graduate students, and they noticed that a lot of our graduate students had self-identified imposter syndrome issues with all of these things and confidence. So this was flagged up as something that we wanted to address. And this is the basis of the rationale for this project. The Bridge Group in particular said in their advice that students would benefit from interacting with professionals who looked and sounded like them and formed a trusted advisor. And I talked about the importance of individual interface at the start when I was talking about line management. And this perhaps highlights that we are, in essence, mentors in a way as good managers. And certainly we should be modeling good behavior because this really does count towards interacting with students. On the right here, you can see some of our interviewees, and on the left, you can see some of their vocations. So these interviewees were from the Faculty of Sciences, all sorts of different departments and divisions, and their employability or employment ranged. So we had people working within higher education, but also people working for all sorts of organizations, charities, consultancy groups, lawyer firms, legal firms. We had entrepreneurs who set up their own companies. We had people working for our own students' union. So there was a nice cross section here of different vocations. In terms of the key thing that I think, these are the key themes that the students identified. One is just struggles, and this is really at the heart of this project. And I think we spend a lot of time in academia rightfully celebrating people's successes, but we maybe don't always do such a good job in celebrating what people have overcome. And this really shone through in this project, people talking about the struggles they had faced. And I think there's really valuable information there for students and staff alike. Our alumni also talked about the importance of preparation and that they hadn't always had the opportunity to, or there were certain expectations that they just didn't felt they had met. This could be sort of regarding interviews or the process of applying for jobs or networking. They also really, many of them regretted not embracing as many opportunities at university as they would have liked. So opportunities to join clubs and societies, basically put themselves out there and network and so on. And this really fed forward into their notion of the importance of community and exposing yourself to different ideas and different people, and also like-minded people. So a lot of them expressed the importance of joining clubs and societies as well. We did pilot this with students, just some psychology students, to see what they thought of these materials. And this is just a word cloud of the top 3 words that they contributed to this. It was a bit of a relief for me to see the word helpful in the middle there. But generally, they seem to pull out of it what we wanted them to. So they found it informative, supportive, accessible, inspiring, and other nice words. We also asked our widening participation students as well about these resources, and they did say that they were relatable. They did feel that they had a connection with the people speaking. They also picked up on this need for community, and they also felt that they appreciated that this wasn't a resource they would normally have access to. And it also lowered the tempo in terms of imposter syndrome as well, or at least the anxiety they felt thinking about these issues to do with their future employment and preparation. So, what did I learn about this particular project in terms of working with students? One was the importance of training. I have created a guide on how to run a project like this that is available by this QR code. And it did include a comprehensive day of training that was recorded. And then I edited the recordings up into chunks so students could go back and review them as many times as they wished. During this training, we covered aspects of the rationale for the project, much like I've just described to you, the equipment that they needed to use, cameras and recording devices, including hands-on demos, safety protocols, so working in pairs. If they felt uncomfortable with an interview, they should be clear that they can retreat from that particular situation. Nothing like that cropped up, but I think if you're managing students, you need to think about things that can maybe go wrong. We also trained them on how to conduct interviews and develop questions. Importantly, how to work as a team. There were team building exercises. We gave them data protection training, so how to manage secure data, because a lot of the data in this project was sensitive, and just the general organizations and systems we expect them to work with. And by and large, this was a very good use of our time, and I think the students really valued this. But there were still issues that cropped up, which just goes to show no matter how much you think you've prepared, this can still be situations. We did have a data breach, for example. So one intern did not copy email addresses into the blind copy function when communicating with a number of alumni. And I feel that this is actually on me as a manager. This is something that I maybe should have foreseen. So this was an avoidable issue, but the scope of the project had changed since we started it. And or when we did our training, we didn't really think that students would be emailing multiple members of staff. So this or multiple alumni. So I think this reflects the importance of just keeping an eye on what exactly the training is you give students and make sure they're equipped to do the tasks that you are giving them. More specific to the project was the issue of data storage. If you're dealing with large amounts of recorded data, actually having it on a cloud can be very difficult to manage. Eventually, we got some hard drives from our audiovisual services, and this served well for students being able to edit the footage. And also time constraints. If you're ever working on footage that requires editing, particularly from people that maybe not edited footage before and that have been trained to edit, this can take more time than you might think. And we actually ran out of time. We managed to create 6 videos, but we felt that we could create 3 more. We did manage to get additional funding to make those extra 3. But you just want to keep that in mind in terms of keeping on task in the project. In terms of the way that you work with students, we found that G Suite, it was very, very useful. And this might be something specific to the University of York in the sense that our email infrastructure is naturally part of this ecosystem. So things such as setting up shared calendar appointments with a shared meeting agenda, a shared Google Drive for collective outputs and resources, spreadsheets. If we were working on a presentation together, we could all work on that together. If students needed to get your attention for a specific query, if they're writing in a Google Doc, they can basically just tag you in a query. And equally, as a manager, you can assign certain things using this tagging function. We found that this worked very well for us, but ultimately what system you use to work with students will be down to you and what's applicable in this infrastructure. But in terms of data collection and data privacy, we also know the system's quite secure for our purposes. Just some miscellaneous tips from this particular project. I think one thing you really owe it to the people working on the project to really close the loop in terms of monitoring outputs of your project. And this is maybe something I've not always been so good at. And I would really encourage anyone working on this project to think about. It can be quite exhausting. You get to the end of a big project and you've got other things on your plate that you need to deal with. But actually, just thinking about how the work that you've created is going to be implemented is quite important. Fortunately, we posted these on YouTube so we can monitor clicks on our videos. But really, you want to think about, are these taken up at other institutions? Where are these clicks coming from? Are there other uses for the resources that you make that were maybe not initially considered? So, for example, I was in discussion with someone to include these as part of interview training at other institutions. Can you help set up similar initiatives? This is why I wrote the toolkit. I was quite keen to share the knowledge that I gained in working on this project. I felt that would be useful for other people. So with the encouragement of the T-Fund committee, I did actually post this on the National Teaching Repository. So this is available. And can you co-present with students at conferences? And if budget is limited and you can only invite so many people to a conference, can they give recorded contributions? Can they help create the presentation so they still have this on their CV? You may want to think about other things as well, such as incorporating your materials into lesson plans, which is something that I put in the toolkit. In terms of student employability, I also advise you advising students to keep a reflective log. And this is, I think, a really good habit to get into. It could be very easy to forget individual responsibilities. And really, probably students will be talking in their upcoming job interviews about the work on their specific project. So they want to be mindful of exactly the roles they did, the responsibilities they've taken, and what they've gotten out of it. So our students for this initiative did actually do this. They were also encouraged to write a student written report collaboratively at the end, and this allowed us to basically see what the students got out of this project, but also gave us a space to reflect on what could have gone better next time. And some of the content I've talked about with you today has actually come from student insights, reflecting on how this project could have been run more smoothly. Just as a case in point, these are our student perspectives and 3 key things they pulled out. They did talk about imposter syndrome. This is unprompted pretty much by them. They pulled this out from the people they interviewed. So this is a very real issue in our alumni. They also really pulled out the appreciation for peers from our alumni. They talked about that a lot. And also the value of learning from setbacks. So things don't always go right from people, and actually learning from these is a really valuable source of information. So this links back to really the heart of the project that I talked about. So the third project I just want to address is something called the Student Engagement Hub. And this is really born primarily out of the fact that we weren't doing enough to really facilitate our feedback processes in the psychology department at the University of York. We felt we could be doing a better job of communicating what feedback's been put in place by students. And we also packaged this with a number of other things. We realized that the environment that students work in is quite noisy. They're told a lot of things. There's lots of initiatives in our department, communities, projects. And we wanted to collate that all into one space for them to basically have access to. We also wanted to signpost support. So this would reduce admin loads for staff and also get students in contact with the person they needed to more quickly. And we also wanted to celebrate staff-student collaboration. So for all of these reasons, we wanted to set up an engagement hub. And this wasn't my idea. This was an idea of our departmental rep, and I helped bring it to life in collaboration with students. So we have one departmental rep who's a paid student representative. We have 10 cohort reps or more working on this project, and then we had some staff feedback. And I won't show you the whole thing, but this is on a virtual learning environment. You can see a snippet on the right there. I picked pixel art graphics in consultation with the students due to my own nerdy proclivities, but we also wanted to make sure students were actually engaging with this platform. It's something that they wanted to engage in. And the order of this is very specifically chosen. We wanted to have feedback and the reps at the top. We wanted a platform for them to easily provide feedback. We have an open document talking about the feedback, and importantly, the feedback we can't implement. So this is a working document that is student facing. This is a requested thing by the students, key links and email contacts in the department, key documents such as their student handbook, online resources, and so on. Accessibility support, and this is an example of where feedback's important. I originally had the classic wheelchair logo here on this, and actually feedback was that this is a very old-fashioned logo. Students didn't really feel that it represented the diversity of disability, and they elected for this sunflower logo, which I was happy to implement on their behalf. We have community projects within our department, communities at the university and abroad. We have staff and student collaborations. So this leads to a Padlet of all the projects and things that students and staff have worked on in our department, including a list of publications. And just off this figure, you can't see it. We've even got a student-generated map of places to visit in York that any student can submit to. And this is just a fun thing for new people arriving at York. Just points of interest around the city. I think there's about 15 or 16 points of interest. I'm not going to lie, a lot of them are to do with sweet treats and cafes, but that's if that's our students' wants, then we're happy to accommodate that. But that's just a fun way of getting students on board. So this is very much a collaborative document. The feedback systems that we use in our department, we have, it's just on the right of the screen here, we have our students who feed forward to course reps. There's typically 1 or 2 per year. And then they feed forward to this head rep, who is Millie Martin in this particular case, although we have a new rep Jack at the moment. They will talk to their social media reps, they will talk to myself and our Director of Learning and Teaching, and also the Students' Union. So just keeping the pipeline with all these effective channels. Now, the way that we got feedback on the particular document that I created, it was initially a pitch from our department rep. She indicated this was something they needed. I created a first draft. We then pitched it to the course reps who provided quite a lot of feedback. And then I iteratively bounced it back and forth between the reps until we had a polished version that I then shared with staff. Staff did a final pass over it and plugged in any gaps and missing information. And then we finally released it to students. This went down very well. We actually won an award for it. And we can actually we know students are engaging with it when I'm talking about monitoring outputs because it's on the VLE. We can tell how much time they're dwelling on it, how much time they're spending on it. I think it also facilitates representation, ensures that student input is at the forefront of the sort of design ethos. I would also say this is what we call a living document, so it's very easy to update. But this also links to some of the additional considerations, and that is maintenance. Any living document that you create with students does require updating. Staff will change positions. This contact details will change. Links get broken or moved. You don't want to be in a situation where you're, for example, pointing students to welfare support that no longer exists. So that is something you do need to keep an eye on if you're creating a project of this type. You also need to consider students' privacy. We have a section where we have photos of all the reps, but not all of them want to maybe have their photo up. So we're happy to accommodate that. We don't include that. If you've got a social media account associated with student representation, you need to make sure they don't post pictures of the reps too, unless you have permission. And lastly, and this is by no means a bad thing, but you do kind of commit. If you have a student-facing feedback platform, you need to be aware that you need to be on the ball with updating it. You don't want to be in a situation where students are giving you feedback, you've acknowledged that you've got that feedback, and then you don't do anything with it. But as I said, this is not a bad thing. It keeps us on our toes in terms of implementing feedback. So the final example I wanted to talk about here is the Disco project, and this is by far the hardest thing I've worked on, and also one of the most rewarding things I've worked on. So this is a toolkit that we designed with students and staff to include disabled people in research. So it was to include disabled people both as collaborators and participants. So there were a number of sort of stakeholders in this. This was initially made under a group embedded within our department, started by my colleague Amanda Hickey, called the DISCO Group, which is the Disabled Community Initiative. And this spans multiple departments, and they all are kind of collaborators from different departments, had input in proofreading this. It was also primarily run by 4 staff and 7 student interns, all from different departments. So there was a broad range of student expertise and experiences baked into this project. Also new for this project, we had a mixture of undergraduate and postgraduate students, with the postgraduates mentoring undergraduate students. So it was acknowledged that postgraduates maybe have more experience with data collection and analysis, and we wanted to leverage that in order to make the project work more effectively. And we also had external proofreaders for version 2, which is going to be rolled out next week. So again, this is another example of a living document. We want to keep it updated. Version 1 is the one that will presently exist if you explore that QR code, but we're about to release what we consider a kind of more complete, polished version in the coming weeks. So this is something that we've been building on. So students and staff here, we work together to build semi-structured interview questions and a survey. So there's a data collection component to this. We ran interviews online, similar to the sort of Disco project. And then our interns wrote up the results and they formed a literature survey. And then this was all used as the basis of the second half of the toolkit, which is collated information into actionable advice for researchers. So our rationale for this project was it kind of benefits a lot of different kind of stakeholders. So in terms of the researcher, it's just a basic, it increases participation and engagement with your research. So around about 25% of the UK population alone actually are disabled or have flagged themselves as disabled on surveys. And that percentage actually increases with the age of the populations involved. So from that perspective alone, if you're running research, you're almost inevitably going to be running people with one or more disabilities. So it's important to be proactive and consider that when conducting research. It's also useful for professional development for staff in talking about these issues sensitively and getting the adequate training and thinking about these things proactively. And also there's legal considerations. The Equality Act of 2010, institutions are required to actually accommodate different abilities. There's also benefits for society. Research, including disabled people, can actually feedback and provide equitable policies and services. And also our contract with the public regarding research, communicating research, bringing them in, talking about research, making them realize they're stakeholders and communicating the results and making sure as many people are included in this equation as possible. And last but not least, benefits for disabled individuals and students. So again, feeling valued and empowered by having input into these projects, reduction in perhaps unintentional risks for people with disabilities working in certain environments, and also perhaps specific to psychology, curriculum. So a lot of our research is conducted on undergraduate students, and in turn, if people with disabilities are not able to participate, they might actually be missing out on crucial aspects or important aspects of their education. So as I said, we've had this three-pronged approach. We had a literature survey, an online survey, and these follow-up interviews. And the key questions throughout were basically, how do people feel they've been excluded? What guidelines currently exist that are useful to implement? And importantly, what's missing from these guidelines? So just to break down some of the lessons I've learned that apply directly to working with students. So one, and these are all things that we actually did as part of the project as well. So I'm not just saying these are things that we've successfully implemented. And I can really see on the back end of this project the importance of doing these things. One is just the recruitment process. So there are a number of steps here that you can take to make sure that recruiting students is as equitable as possible. One is just making sure your job advert is digitally accessible. So that means it's read by screen readers, and is on a platform that could be read by screen readers should people be using assistive technology. There's a lot more to digital accessibility than that, but that's a big one. And I do encourage you to have a look at our toolkit for more information on digital accessibility. Also, flexibility in the application process. So we found that actually we got the most out of people when we provide interview questions in advance, and also giving people the option to share personal statements in alternative formats, for example, through pre-recorded statements. And some of our interns did actually do this. We also encourage flexibility during the interview process. We actually conducted all of ours online, but you can use assistive captioning and things when you do recruitment in that forum. Explicitly promoting accessibility within the job advert, for example, by promoting flexible working hours or other potential accommodations that could be made, is a very useful thing to do. And maybe including someone who identifies as disabled in the reviewing steps. Also, we encourage to promote disability disclosure, but without pressure. It's a private thing that people don't have to disclose. But I think you want to make sure people feel welcomed and supported. So you want to leave the door open for people who do want to disclose that. And lastly, I think a bit of transparency regarding who is actually doing the interviewing. In our case, all this involved was making some profiles and a little bit about ourselves, the people on the interview panel. I think can lower anxiety levels for people getting interviewed. Something that became evident to me throughout this project is how to avoid acts of tokenism. And this doesn't just apply to individuals with disabilities. It kind of speaks to meaningful engagement with students and collaborators at large. Tokenism is a term basically meaning the superficial involvement of someone. So students aren't just workhorses to do work for you. They need to be included as meaningful collaborators. With respect to disability, there are some specific things just to be aware of. And I should just be clear that this isn't always necessarily maliciously done. These are things that can be unintentionally done. So first of all, just making incorrect assumptions about individuals and their capabilities. So someone with a visual impairment, for example, may not be completely devoid of vision. Someone in a wheelchair may still be able to walk around. They just might have mobility issues. So you don't want to just look at someone and make quick assumptions about what they can and can't do. This is a really important thing, and it really rubs people with disabilities up the wrong way when assumptions are made without any kind of degree of consultation. Minimizing participation. So not really giving anyone a steer on the project or a steer in the appropriate way, perhaps due to these aforementioned reasons regarding assumptions. Perhaps minimizing access. So if you ignore barriers that people have for working, it could be to do with light levels, it could be to do with access to the working space, can be part of this. Marginalizing perspectives. So you don't want to be in a position where you're delegitimizing. If you have a project, for example, this very project itself, where you've got lots of people writing on a document, in the editing process, you don't want to just delete loads of stuff because that could be someone's lived experience of disability. And also minimal planning. So it's very much encouraged to be proactive about these things rather than sort of passively addressing issues to do with disability when they come up. Another really important thread that kind of really shone throughout this project was the importance of consultation. And because many disabilities are hidden, and it's certainly not on the onus of the individual you're talking to necessarily disclose a disability, it's actually recommended you take the steps I'm about to discuss with all people involved in a project. It's just probably generally good, flexible working practice. So if you do have some examples of some accommodations you can make, you just want to actually have them prepared. Give a list. It could be, closer parking to the department or things of that nature. And in our toolkit, we do talk about this in greater length. You may want to seek guidance from an internal body. For example, if in higher education, your disabilities division might have some insight on what's available in terms of accommodations. You maybe want to talk to people about their language preference. Language is very important. And you might want to have a general question alluding to this when you consult with the individual as part of your teamwork. I would encourage any group or lab group to keep a working log of accommodations that can be made and add to this over time. And this should be available to everyone just to raise consciousness of these adjustments that can be made. And in general, just keeping lines of communication open. So being clear that there are multiple channels of communication with the organisers of the project in question. Also, just flexible working. This is really valued by both students, non-disabled and disabled alike. And there are different ways you can do this, but it is important, as I said, to work around student obligations. In terms of accessibility, we actually decided on a system where students at any point could submit an emoji into our group work chat, and then that just means that they were having a non-participation day for whatever reason. There's no need to elaborate or explain this. Now, the type of emoji you use is completely up to you as a team. We picked a spoon based on spoonerisms. So this is from a disability advocate, Miss Arandio. Apologies if I'm butchering her surname there. But essentially, she has a chronic illness, and she wrote an article in 2003 describing this, her energy levels in terms of spoons. So we picked these spoons just to represent that. But it doesn't have to be an academically minded emoji. You can choose whatever you want. We found this worked very well. Students did use this, and it helps destigmatize non-participation for potentially very legitimate reasons in parallel with flexible working. Apologies if I'm telling people things they already know, but just the power of the Gantt chart is really, really useful for keeping track of the team, the individual, and the task. How you set this up is entirely up to you. This is an example from this particular project. There's actually 3 tabs to this. The first one is my glorious Gantt in front of you. The second one was a weekly progress and tasks section, so I could monitor what individuals on the project were doing. And then the third one was miscellaneous info of various useful links and team members and so on. And this allows you to keep on basically track of all the things that I talked about in terms of important management at the start. And nothing really sharpens the senses like seeing a deadline barreling down the Gantt towards you. So it really helped me and my team keep focused on what we needed to do. Just before we close off, just some miscellaneous tips. I think you really need to have a conversation with your students about how they want to be represented at any work output. So our students, after consultation, chose the language students with lived experience of disabilities. This is how they're represented in our work. You want to keep track of collaborators as well. So students invariably graduate. LinkedIn is very good for this, but you might just want to get a non-university email if their email is going to be disappeared. We won an award for this project, and most of our interns are graduated, so I had to track them down in order to give them their certificates. which is a bit of a first world problem, but also I really wanted to give the students credit for their hard work. And this was just extra things I had to do. But you may want to consult with them about research outputs or publications, or whatever else is you're working on. In terms of communications, we found Slack channels. This may not be available at every institution, but this is basically halfway between an email and a direct message on a social media platform. And it's still part of the official record of a project. But if you get everyone on a Slack channel, it's a very good way of asking questions quickly. And if there's something time sensitive, such as a student stuck on an interview and a bit of technology is not working correctly, I can quickly step in and help them with that. It's recommended to have a weekly routine, just keeping track of everyone, and routine is important. We did most of our meetings online, but it might be worth occasionally having a meeting in person if that is possible. Obviously, I hope it goes without saying, make sure students are included in successes. And also, just to reiterate, I really do encourage people to engage with professional development, such as management training. I really did feel perhaps a little bit out of my depth at the start of this project. It was successful, but I think there's certainly things I could have done better. And this has really motivated me to engage with professional training. So, just to quickly wrap things up, just assigning all of these things and some new things into this management framework that I introduced at the start. In terms of the task, I think defining very clear goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and importantly, time bound is critical. So keep all of these things in mind when constructing your Gantt, which I cannot um, understate how useful it is to have these for these type of projects. And also in terms of dissemination, this is important both for student recognition, but also for reflective feedback on how things could be done more optimally next time. In terms of consulting with the team, you want to brief the team collectively and you want to create the right climate and foster a synergy between people. Part of this is promoting accessibility in your recruitment practice, your communication systems, and flexible working styles, and meeting frequently. In terms of organizing people, you want to keep time management. You want to make sure that everyone's doing and completing their tasks on schedule. In terms of striking that balance between oversight and letting people work independently, and encourage personal development throughout. So there's an opportunity to train students. You should do that, and obviously choose the right tools for the job. Lastly, motivating individuals. I think, in my experience, and I'm not just saying this, meaningful inclusion produces very strong motivation in students. Paid work, I think, is very important for the equality reasons I mentioned earlier. And getting to know members allows you to delegate work appropriately, as well as meeting accessibility requirements. And as I said, recognizing people in outputs. And lastly, and this is again part of our toolkit, it's okay to make mistakes. It's your attitude about how you address mistakes. I've certainly made mistakes and learned from them. And we noted when we were constructing our toolkit that many people working in accessibility, for example, their entire careers make mistakes. And really, what you need to do is just take a step back, take responsibility for the situation. If anything's gone wrong, talk about anyone who's been effective. Take reasonable steps to rectify or mitigate the situation if possible. Reflect on how you might change things in future, and just be kind to yourself. So working in terms of accessibility does require a degree of perspective taking, and I would say compassion, and you need to apply that to yourself. These are all the pragmatic steps any of us can make, and it's better to have an attitude about being proactive and doing better than just not engaging with that at all. And this quote by Maya Angelou, who's a civil rights activist, at the bottom really, I think, sums up this. So do the best you can until you know better, and then when you do know better, do better. It's basically acknowledging that we can do the best we can and that we're in a constant state of improvement. So that's it from me. I'm happy to stick around for questions. I appreciate people might need to go, but I really just, again, really want to acknowledge all our amazing students who've worked at all these initiatives. Our funding, very generously provided by various pots of money within the University of York. And obviously, just some quick links here to the various projects that I've talked about and my socials again. So I'll be happy to minimize this and deal with any questions. Yeah, I really appreciate if people got to go. So I'm only just seeing the chat now. Um, I'm happy to answer any questions about this.
There was a question earlier in the chat, Alex, about whether the management course you were taking was offered as part of your institution or through LinkedIn Learning, or how you accessed that management course.
That's a great question. So this management course was something that I sought out and wasn't actually available to my pay band. So I basically had to write in a special request. It's an internal management course. It looked exactly like the thing I wanted to do, and it's one of the best decisions I've made. It was really great to. I think in higher education you can end up working in kind of isolated bubbles quite quickly, in like lab groups or departments, and actually meeting people across our institution, talking about shared experiences with management, talking about things that could be done better. So it's with, I think, about 15 junior managers who are in a similar sort of point in their career across the university. And it's really valuable. I know sometimes management courses, we've all seen maybe the BBC's The Office, where they kind of lampoon management training. And maybe you've done those mandatory videos. I certainly have to do mandatory training courses. I've seen the same sofa burned down as part of our fire training about 7 times now on a yearly basis. Um, I think people sometimes can get a little sniffy about kind of management training. I don't think, in my experience, that's justified at all. I think the course that's been set up has been very thoughtfully set up, and really, they've worked very hard to make it relevant to as many different departments and divisions as possible. It's very hands-on as well. There's lots of exercises. So in short, I highly endorse professional development, and it's also very good to have on your CV. Um, and I wish I'd done it sooner. That's my only regret. Was there any other? It's okay if no one's got any questions.
I actually have a question, Alex. I
Sure.
thought the projects you spoke about, they sound so great and so cool. Um, I was wondering about the Psych Out and the Graduate Voices projects, particularly. How did recruitment for those work? So, did you put out an advert and then you were able to take any students who were interested in participating, or did you have some kind of recruitment process? Was there kind of a set number of students you could take to participate in each of those projects?
We were very much constrained by funding, but that was sort of baked into our applications. So for the graduate voices, it was because we were interviewing STEM alumni. We wanted our students to be STEM students, but I think there's definitely scope for this kind of project with the humanities. That wasn't deliberately leaving the humanities out; it was just within the scope of our funding. Um, for the for Psych Out, this is just open to all students. Anyone from any cohort can participate, but it is within our department. Although I would be open if someone came from an adjacent department, for example, our Department of Education. Certainly, we have a psychology and education division there. The important thing for me is getting students involved. I'm not too precious from my point of view as a member of staff. Um, One thing I didn't talk about in terms of having a digital issue, one of the benefits of that is it can be as large as you want it to be, um, time constraints permitting on the editor's part. Whereas previously, when it was printed, we only had the budget for a certain number of pages. So in principle, you could have quite a large number of contributions. And contributions have fluctuated. I think our lowest was about 4 contributed articles. Our largest is about 11. Having it online also gives you that kind of flexibility in terms of contributions, but it's always simmering away in the background. We've always got students working on it. Um, so each of the projects I talked about did have slightly different recruitment phases. For the disability project, for example, we did an open call for students across the university. Um, Specifically, we worded it in the advert for lived experience of disability. So that doesn't necessarily mean the student has to be disabled. For example, they could have responsibilities as a caregiver for someone. They could have a close family member affected. And I think that allows a larger degree of latitude and range of inputs and experiences on the project, which we certainly did leverage.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
I think I've got a question here. So Anna said I'm wondering in the Disco project whether you consider tips applicable generally, or if you have data and think that some tips should be adjusted, included for invisible disabilities. With invisible disability, a big challenge is that um, oh, a big challenge is that if you disclose, often people tell you, "Oh, but you don't look disabled." Uh, so I'm very curious if this invisible versus visible disabilities emerge in the project or not. A lot of things emerge in our project. There were lots of things, including, interestingly, everyone talks about accessibility, but people don't really talk about when these things conflict. So, for example, not only there are different accessibility demands based on departments, there are also different accessibility demands even between individuals. So, someone might require lower light levels, whereas somebody with a visual impairment might require higher light levels. Maybe someone prefers background noise when they're working, maybe someone doesn't. Um, I think leaving things open, which is why I suggested in my presentation, just having a blanket consultation. And I think everyone wins on that front because then you're automatically being proactive in creating a welcoming space. Whether people choose to disclose that information or not is up to them. When we do talk about invisible disabilities, we have whole subsections on it and the importance of these in being acknowledged. I think your point about that language and saying you don't look disabled is actually something that I might actually go back and include in version 2 because I don't actually think we've got that point. But we do talk about common mistakes and misconceptions about disability, and there's a growing list of those basically. And these are traps that I think very well-intentioned people can fall into. I do worry with the kind of advice that you can give out in these kind of toolkits. It can come from a slightly accusatory place. I think it's important to acknowledge that actually most people are very well intentioned and they can just go about these things slightly clumsily. And actually, if you consult the disability community, they are aware of that. They're not, people aren't unreasonable. They do understand you might slip up with terminology or maybe refer to something in the wrong way. And this is why I had that section on mistakes as well. I think it's um, a very human thing to do is to make mistakes in this setting. But yes, that we do make a clear distinction between, or a clear discussion between visible and non-visible disabilities, and we do have a whole roster of advice in our toolkit. Should you want to dig into that a little bit deeper?
Thank you, Alex. I already Googled and saved, and I'll go and look in depth. Thanks. It's a very interesting project.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I might be sending, just for transparency as well, a feedback document. So I talked about trying to keep track of deliverables, things that you've done, and I think it's quite easy to not get that information. So I'll probably be at the bottom of the form. If you do find this useful, there is a feedback form at the bottom of the toolkit. So I do encourage anyone to complete that. And I might even send one out about this presentation if people found it useful. And I'd encourage anyone doing a presentation to do the same as well. Um, so thank you. It was a great question. Great. I don't know whether anyone else has got any questions.
I
Well,
can't
look,
see any more in the chat.
it was thank you so much for those of you for everyone who joined today and also for you guys who stuck around for just the remaining questions. I really appreciate it, and I hope the start of your semester goes smoothly and you get to work with some students.
Thanks, Alex. That was such an interesting, engaging talk. Thank you.
No problem. It's great to be here. See you. Bye
Bye.
bye.